Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining today's Digital Security Summit. It's really great to have you all on the call this morning. My name's Simon, and I'm the lead for further and higher education across the UK, as well as looking after G Suite Enterprise for Education, across EMEA. Very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Ollie Trussell, EMEA Solutions Engineer. So today we're here to discuss Google's approach to digital security within the education sector and how this relates to your education community, whether you're coming from a K-12, further ed or higher ed background. And just for a bit of fun, we thought we'd make this session a little more interactive and hands-on. So please do join in with interactive quizzes. You can see the instructions on the slide there. Head to joinpd.com on your phone, which is probably an easy way to go about it. And you can enter the code in the top right-hand corner to get ready to answer some questions as we progress through the session. So just to take us through the agenda a little, we'll be looking at some of these main items here. G Suite security overview, just give you a high-level overview of how Google is treating security overall and some of the infrastructure we have in place that underpins all of our products. We'll take a look at G Suite for Education, the security and best practices there. Ollie will be diving in to take a look at what security measures we already have in place for G Suite for Education users and what controls are available. Similarly, we'll be doing the same for G Suite Enterprise for Education, diving in even deeper to understand what advanced security controls are available within G Suite Enterprise for Education. And we'll even add some additional features as well that may be of interest before we point you towards starting a free trial if you really want to get across the tool and see what all the fuss is about. We can talk about next steps to getting across that as well. As we work through the session, please do chime into the Q&A doc. You'll see actually, if you load this up, there's an FAQ link attached, which is really worth checking out as well. Before we dive in, let's have a little look at what's new in EDU, what updates we have to share. So for starters, you may be aware of this already, but Meet's rolling out some highly anticipated features. While I explain some of these, maybe it's a good chance to jump into this first question here on your phone. Which of these are you most looking forward to? Be quite interesting to understand. So these features include the tiled layout. I like to think of it as the Brady Bunch layout, where you can see up to 16 users in a screen, higher quality video content with Chrome tab. It's fantastic for audio purposes. Low light mode, improving your visibility. And here's one I'm really looking forward to is noise cancellation to reduce background noise. So perhaps there's a dog barking, a police siren, your washing machine's on in the middle of a meeting. We'll be able to sort that out pretty soon. And actually, just a note on that, that's rolling out for G Suite Enterprise for Education users. These are rolling out over coming weeks, and some of them are already available as well. And the next update I want to talk about is really security for Windows 10. So this is highly anticipated. Ollie's going to be diving into this. I really wish I had noise cancellation right now, actually. So Ollie's going to be diving into this later on during the call. We're basically managing and securing Windows 10 devices through the admin console, which is a big plus. So why are we here and why does this even matter? Well, we're here to focus on digital security, which, as we all know, is always important and has always been on the radar. Why it matters now is when we consider the current climate. So we're living through an unprecedented time in history. The COVID-19 pandemic has effectively forced school closures around the world. I think it's been over 188 countries shutting down all schools, which has had an impact of over 1.5 billion students. It's massive. And as a result, we're seeing huge reliance on distance learning technologies. So it brings an even greater focus on security and how we're keeping our institutions and users' data secure. So let's bring this global situation back to the UK, where we've also seen, obviously, a massive impact on education. And we thought this would be a good start to test your knowledge. So get your phones ready to answer this question.
We've got about 30 people in the quiz at the minute on Pear Deck. So we'll give everyone just a few moments. You've got 4 choices on your phone. So if you have joined at joinpd.com, the code is on your screen in the banner at the bottom there. We'll give everyone just a few moments to think back to what feels like a lifetime ago. There's no prizes here necessarily. Everyone's a winner. But we're looking pretty good. So I'll quickly share what you're thinking right now. And well done to those of you who did choose Friday, March the 20th. That was correct. It feels a long, long time ago. March 27th, some people optimistic there, but that's great. Well done, everyone who joined along there. Back to you, Simon.
Thanks, Ollie. That's great. So nice to see everyone chime in on that. I think it's fun to get involved. So, yeah, moving back to distance learning readiness, while we've seen distance learning grow as a major consideration for schools, what we find is the majority were not really ready or equipped to handle these closures and the need to support all learners with remote learning opportunities. So this recent market brief from every week showed that almost 50% of schools weren't confident they could provide every child the support they needed. And only 22% were confident actually in their ability to carry out these capabilities for the duration of the pandemic, which is, really just understanding, I suppose, what our environment and what our context is and where we're at in education with dealing with the change. And if we move along and look to the next slide, with change, we can see, everything has been influenced, right? I mean, this slide couldn't be more pertinent today. Technology is changing, students are changing, institutions are changing. And there are some positives to this, with the change, but there's also a new level of threat that is introduced. Major security threats could be closer than you think. Now that we're even more cloud-based, users are exposed to more threats. And as the world becomes more tech literate, there's also an increase in bad actors. As more organizations become more increasingly reliant on technology, naturally we see that risk grow. And, in my role, I speak to customers across education every day. I'm alarmed by the number of phishing attacks or DDoS threats I come across from institutions. It's higher than I actually thought when I started out. But there are some positives here, right? So yes, there's a lot of phishing attacks happening, but we're filtering 10 million spam every minute, sorry. It's a lot more than every day. And, when we look at DDoS attacks, because of our size and infrastructure, we can absorb the largest attacks. And so where does all this leave us? Well, we know that landscape's literally shifting beneath our feet at a rate of knots. We're seeing an increased cyber attacks and threats to our security. And with these security threats in mind, education institutions are faced with a tough choice between control and autonomy of their users, right? So what do? Do you really maximize the security, buttoning down on security potentially at the risk of the user's satisfaction? Or do you err to the side of giving greater autonomy for users? Because we know that users are more autonomous now. They're used to it. They're going to find easier ways to work, more intuitive, collaborative ways to work. They want that autonomy. And, what's the balance here? What do you choose as an education leader? Well, here at Google, we understand it shouldn't really be about having to choose. In the modern age of education, we need to be providing the right balance of control while still ensuring an excellent user experience tailored to the needs of the user. And I think this is a really important point here. That the needs of the user will be different, right? Especially in the context of what we're discussing here in education, whether it's a K-12 student compared to a university student or a staff member or an IT admin. We really need the flexibility here to allow these different users to get on and do the best work possible and achieve the right balance for institutions, which will be different based on the needs of the institutions as well. So now that we understand the context of the landscape, let's have a little look at the way we approach security, our philosophy to security, and our approach from an overarching view here. Again, I think it's worth pointing out that first of all, we know security and the growing complexity of threats is still a top trend. As you can see, Google are well placed to handle complex threats at scale. We have a legacy of managing these threats. So calling out some of these numbers here, 694,000 web pages scanned for harm every minute, 2 billion devices protected with safe browsing, 400 plus million Android devices checked for health every day. You get the sense of the scale. And in security, scale does matter. In order to secure this infrastructure, we've got more than 850 security engineers. We're investing more than 2 billion annually on security, and there's a lot of research as well involved. It's worth pointing out, the backbone. We're operating one of the largest networks in the world, connects data centers with hundreds of thousands of miles of fiber optic cable, consisting of more than 130 points of presence across 35 countries. And we're continuing to add and scale this as well, while considering, the needs of customers within the regions, their preferences and policy requirements, of course. The advantage of this network really is about delivering low latency and high throughput, but also improving security once again. So once customers' traffic is on our network, it's no longer transiting the public internet, and it makes it less likely to be attacked, or manipulated in any way. Up front, any discussion we have when we start to talk about Google at scale and security leads to privacy, which is understandable, right? And it's because of our customer data and a large familiar base of consumer services. But I like to call out a few misconceptions right now about how we operate and how we treat data. It's really important for you to know that, you own your own data, not Google. Google never sells customer data to third parties. We don't use customer data for advertising. Yes, all your data is encrypted at rest and in transit by default. And there's a few others here. We're guarding against insider access. We never give any government entity backdoor access. And of course, our privacy practices are audited against international standards, which is really a critical point. Leads to my next point around compliance, right? So we're ensuring that we're compliant within the regions and markets we operate to make it easier for our customers to ensure they're adhering to regulations. So, considering GDPR, we're updating the data processing amendment in line with GDPR requirements. There's an extensive GDPR resource center. There are third-party certifications that you can leverage, and we continue to engage with regulators to ensure that we're kind of keeping up with things. And at this stage, I think I'll hand over to Ollie.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be the strict teacher and see here who was listening to Simon's lovely summary of the Google security features there. So if you haven't already, feel free just to head to joinpd.com. I can see we've got about 35 students in the class. The tool we're using here today is something called Pear Deck. And on your phone, if you've joined and entered your code, we've got 5 quick questions coming at you. So G Suite for Education is GDPR compliant, and on your mobile devices, please tick answer question and choose true or false. So this is Pear Deck, which is a really great tool, actually, particularly now to use for kind of distance learning. If you've got a class and you want to, instead of just go through a slide presentation, but add some interactivity to it, it's a really nice way to do that. And they've got a really great Google Slides add-on. So let's have a look at your responses to this coming in quickly now. So you can see, congratulations to most of you who got true there. That one person there clearly wasn't listening. Google is GDPR compliant, and we can go through, and there's loads of information about that, and I think Simon shared some of those great features there. Okay, question 2. Google's undersea cables are shark-proof, true or false? Enter now on your phone. These questions do get a little bit harder, I think. And let's have a look now. We've got a few more coming in. Well done to all of you. This is correct. They are actually coated in Kevlar, these cables. It's a hell of a thick amount on it. If you have some time, which I think a lot of us do at the minute, there's some really great kind of security white papers you can read about our network infrastructure, which I'd recommend. Okay, question number 3. Google owns all of your school's data, true or false? People are doing good at this, Simon. I think they were listening. You're a great teacher, great educator.
Thank you, Ollie.
Cool. One person did say true, and they have now changed their mind, which is great. So correct, absolutely well done, everyone. Google does not own your data. The school is the owner. Google is simply the data processor for you. Okay, question 4. Bit trickier now. So Google Meet recently passed a milestone number of minutes of video calls per day. Does anybody know what that was? You should have 4 options on your phone. A little bit trickier, this one. So Google Meet, we've had around a 550 times increase from where we were in kind of February. So yeah, a hell of a lot of people using Google Meet, and it's done extremely well. So built on our kind of cloud infrastructure, it's been incredibly resilient. And hopefully you guys will know for education, we've been rolling out features at a rate of knots actually around Google Meet, which Simon mentioned some of those that are coming up soon as well. So some really useful stuff just came out this week. Let's have a look. This has been a bit more divisive, not quite as divisive as the Jaffa Cake question at the beginning, but we've got a real mixture here. It was in fact 2 billion minutes per day. So well done for any of you got there. That's roughly 3,800 years of meetings per day. So quite a lot. So well done if you got that right. And the 5th question before we move on is, what percentage of cyber attacks start with a phishing email? So we've left this open. If anyone can get the exact number, I'll be very, very impressed. And as we're showing this, we can see we've got a nice little spread here. Some people have gone very, very low, but we're all ticking quite nicely up here and around the 85, 86%. Let's have a look at some of your answers, see if anyone got the correct answer. The correct answer, well done. If you got 91, I can see at least one person got the correct answer. So well done, 91% of emails start with a phishing attack. And that's really good to keep in mind as we talk about some of the security features around Gmail that we look at later. Good stuff. Thanks for joining in with that. So I'll take over now in just a moment. But before we do, I'm going to quickly pass back over to Simon, who'll just introduce our next section.
Thanks very much, Ollie. Yeah, that was fun. And thanks for taking part. So the next section really is looking at G Suite for Education and understanding what security best practices are involved as well. And Ollie will take us deeper into that. But before we do that, maybe we'll just have a quick look at G Suite for Education. So most of you on the call are quite familiar with it. But anyone new to this, in a nutshell, G Suite for Education is a suite of tools designed to empower educators and students as they learn and innovate together. So collaborative tools like Drive, Sheets, name it. Jamboard is there. Managing all your tasks with Calendar and managing your classroom with Forms there as well. Communicating with Gmail and Google Meet, of course, and administering in the background. Now that you understand, what's involved really in G Suite for Education, let's take a look at what we can do in the back end to kind of really make sure things are secure. So I'll hand over to Ollie again at this stage.
Great stuff. Thanks, Simon. So we're going to have a look at some security solutions starting in G Suite for Education. And when we look at our security, we like to basically place it in 3 key buckets. So one is how you can protect your data. The second is how you can protect your users. And the third is how you can provide insights for security issues in and around your domain. So we're going to have a look through here. As we go through, I'm going to switch between the presentation and some kind of live demos of the admin console. So we're going to start off by looking at how you can use G Suite to help protect your data. Starting with one of my favorite tools, which is called data loss prevention. And this just allows you as a G Suite administrator to basically go through and even if you have allowed your users to share files externally, perhaps, you can actually go through and apply rules that will prevent intentional or unintentional data loss. So we're going to go have a look and see how some of those work. So let's have a look here. I'm going to jump into my admin console, which hopefully all of you are familiar with. But if you're not, this is where you manage your entire G Suite and Chrome deployment. And you can start off just by looking in the security section. And in the security section, you have a number of different resources, which I'm going to go through today. But the one that we're going to look at is data protection. And it's great because it always asks you to sign in when you're doing a live demo, which is fantastic. And you can go through and you can manage these data protection rules. So I've got a couple signed up here. What's fantastic about this is there's a number of templates that are already made for you. So you can just go through, add new rules. You can set a new rule from template. And basically you have all these options. So let's imagine if I want to prevent any financial information being shared outside of my domain, I can choose to apply this to all of my users. I can choose to exempt some users. You might, for example, have some finance staff who might need to share external files with credit card information or bank accounts or sort codes, for example. But then you have all these kind of detectors that are just built in there for you. So, for example, it can detect any document that might have a credit card number in or a bank account. But you'll see we have all these different options that you can go ahead and choose from. You can specify as many or as few as you need from here. And then once you've done that, you can specify what to happen. So you can choose to either just block that from being shared, or you could give a warning at the point of sharing. So to demonstrate that in action, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, quite literally, and see if I can show how this works. So let's imagine if I want to go through and I've had an email, I'm a user, and someone has asked me to share their bank details through an attachment. So I'm going to say, here is my credit card number. And then I can go through and start typing in my credit card number. Now, this is a live webinar, so this is not actually my webinar, of course, my actual credit card number. But what should happen is within just a few moments, it should detect that this is actually going to be contain the credit card information. And what you'll see is this share button in the top right-hand corner will change, and you'll see like a shield will appear from it. I'm going to give this a quick refresh to kickstart that. But essentially, when I go to try and share this, and obviously because I'm doing a live demo on a webinar, it's taken a little bit extra time. But I'll come back to this in just a moment. What will happen is if I try to share this externally, it's going to go through and detect, and it will revoke those sharing permissions. So let's imagine if I want to go through and try and share this with an account, I can go through and maybe send this. And then what will happen is in just a moment, it's going to completely revoke that. So I'll come back to this after the next little demo that I've shown, and you'll see that this will be blocked from sharing, which is a really great tool. I love it how it doesn't work whenever I do a live demo here, but trust me, it's kept your data nice and secure. So I'll come back to that in just a moment. So that's data loss prevention, a really, really clever tool, and it works on obviously all of our kind of Google Drive editor files, but any kind of PDF or Word document using OCR as well. Cool. And then another really great feature that we have is Google Vault, which is our kind of e-discovery archiving retention tool. Some of you will have been familiar with this already, but if you've never been here, you can just access it at ediscovery.google.com. And it's included, so all of your users have a Vault license in Google for Education. And how it works is you can do these things such as like investigations. But what I would strongly recommend if you haven't already is setting these default retention rules. So you can specify here how long you keep your data for. And you can choose to either expunge it from your retention records, your archive, or you can actually choose to remove it from end users' inboxes. So for example, my mail, I've chosen to keep my messages for 365 days from when the message was sent. And then we've chosen to expunge only the messages that users have already deleted from our archive. You do have this option as well, where you can actually expunge all messages, even messages that still exist in the user's inbox. So if I chose this option, a year down the line, essentially any email that a user received, there'd be no way of them accessing it. So we know that you have different kind of ways to go through and configure this here. But what I also really like is you can actually go through and you can create custom retention rules. So this is a really useful tool, and this came up from a school yesterday. They wanted to basically remove a particular email from everybody's inbox that had been sent 2 or 3 months ago. So it's actually very easy to do. So you can just use Vault really cleverly to create these kind of custom retention rules here. So for example, I managed to find that the message ID of the email in question. You can choose to apply it to all users who might have received that message. And then you can actually just choose here. So you can choose to only keep it from 1 day. And then you can choose to expunge all messages, including messages in users' inboxes. So if you ever have a case where somebody has sent an email, you obviously have a 24-hour gap. This won't remove it immediately. We can look at the investigation tool in G Suite Enterprise in a minute to see how you could do that. But this allows a really easy way to go through and remove an email or emails from a certain individual from all users' inbox at the touch of a button, just using Google Vault. So a really clever tool that's actually little known. Cool. And just quickly, I just want to show the point here. You can see now that this document with my credit card number, just to prove I wasn't lying, you can see that it's automatically revoked access to that user because it's detected the credit card information there.
Ali, I'll just jump in. Actually, I think a question's come in. We might be able to pull that up on the screen. Yeah. We could just address that one. There it is.
Google Meet data. Okay, great stuff. Yeah, so in Google Vault, so the question is, what exactly is being retained? So if you have Google Meet, essentially what happens is anytime you make a recording, then that will obviously save in your Google Drive. But we know that actually we had requests from certain users that whilst those Meet recordings will basically match your Google Drive specifications, you have the option to any specific Meet files that have been recorded. You can choose different retention rules for those recordings. So hopefully that answers your questions. Essentially, every time you record a Meet, there is also a transcript file recorded with that as well. And the transcript file, which is just a simple text log of all the chat that's been happening during the recording, that will also follow these Meet retention rules as well. So great question. I hope that answers it. If not, chuck it back in the chat and we can follow up later. Any more questions, Simon?
That was the main one I saw there, and probably a quick shout out to Bid for asking that great question. Thanks.
Thanks, Abid. Good to hear from you. Great stuff. So that was Google Vault, and then just I'm not going to delve into show how this works, but you can if you want to configure an extra kind of level of security, you can actually host your own S/MIME encryption certificates and keys within Gmail as well. So a nice extra way to ensure that your users are safely communicating between people they're emailing externally as well. Cool, so that brings us into our second kind of bucket, which is all about how you can use G Suite to help protect your users. And so the first thing we have here is this password alert extension. So some of you may have already deployed this. We have it in Google. It's really great. Essentially, if I tried to enter my Google password, if I was signing up for a different website, so let's imagine if I went to facebook.com, tried to create an account, entered an email, and I entered my Google password as the password for that account, I would then get a prompt. And what Google would do is they would force me to change my Google password to prevent it being reused anywhere else on the web. So we have this support article. You can deploy this. It's a Chrome extension, and you can actually deploy it through an open source server. But I wanted to share actually here, we've just launched a new feature within Chrome, which does pretty much exactly the same thing. So if you're using Chromebooks or you have your Chrome browser managed in some way, you can actually configure in the Chrome user and browser settings now. We have this section called Chrome Safe Browsing. And you'll see we've just added this new feature called Password Alert. And you can actually choose whether to have no password protection warning, which is the default, or you can actually do exactly the same thing there. So you can go and trigger on password reuse, or you can trigger on password reuse on phishing page. And then you could just go through and enter the URL. So this could either be the Google change password URL, or if you are using a single sign-on to provide into, you could go through and specify and link out to your single sign-on login password. So it does the same thing. Really great tool. If you're using managed Chromebooks, I'd strongly recommend thinking about this, maybe for all your users or definitely just for your staff. There's also a few other really cool things in here as well. So like download restrictions, I'd probably recommend actually blocking dangerous downloads when you're managing Chrome or Chrome browser on here as well. So that's the password alert feature, which is really fantastic. And then two-step verification options. So hopefully you're all aware, but if not, you can actually enforce certain users to have to enforce two-step verification. We have a number of different options. If you want to go super secure, you can force them so they have to have a physical hardware token, a security key. So we know a number of kind of schools will go ahead and do this, and they will distribute security keys just to their staff. I would just say from a practical point of view, if you're in a primary school, you probably don't want to enforce two-step verification for all of your year 1 or year 2 users, because that's just not going to work in practice. But yeah, all these different options for two-step verification, and we're actually increasing some of the available options for you there. Cool. And then so a few really nice extra features. So within Gmail, we've introduced a new safety area, which I'll quickly show you in a minute, which allows you to do a few things. So you can basically place certain emails into quarantine based on your kind of phishing or malware controls. You can scan and detect anomalous attachments in emails and choose what to do with it. And you've got some extra kind of Google Group functionality there as well. So I'll quickly show you this. So in the admin console in the Gmail area, you can go ahead and you've got this feature called Safety. And there's some really nice features that you can go through. And I'd recommend, if you haven't already, just going through and becoming familiar with this and ensuring you apply kind of best policies and best practice for your domain. We know that some of you will have some users who will spend a lot of time sending attachments to external users. So you just want to make sure that you apply this in a way that's not going to kind of block or restrict their way here. But just, you've got these 3 different options. So attachment control, links and external images control, and spoofing and authentication. Around the attachments, I definitely recommend just kind of ticking this one here. So any encrypted attachments from untrusted senders, you've got a few options. You might want to move this to spam or just show a warning to your users. Anything that have scripts in there, anomalous attachment types in emails. When it comes to links and external images, this is quite a useful tool. So identify links behind shortened URLs. So if someone sends like a short link, like a bit.ly, you have the option to actually replace that with the full link to give a user a bit more insight into where it's come from for phishing attacks. You can scan linked images, all these really great features here. And then finally, in the spoofing and authentication, at the very least, I'd probably just choose this one here, protect against inbound email spoofing for your domain. So basically, any messages that aren't authenticated with SPF or DKIM, you've got a few options, and I'd recommend at the very least just showing a warning to that end user that they've received this email from someone that hasn't applied kind of standard industry standard regulations on Mailflow. So a really nice feature, and that's called the safety section, and that's available in Gmail. So please do become familiar with that. And then finally, on the protecting users section, this is the advanced protection program. So a really useful tool. Basically, if you have any kind of CEOs or head teachers, you can just turn on the advanced protection program, and that will go through and give them the basically the highest level of security that we offer. So just by default, you know that they've got all the most stringent and strictest kind of security features applied to them. Cool. And then so the third bucket that we have around our security features is the ability to provide insights. So we know that you've got your users protected, your data's been really well protected, but we know that in some case the bad actors are getting better and better at kind of creating these phishing emails that may slip through the net, for example. So we've got a few ways to go through and allow you to provide insights. So there's a quick question on your phone for this one, actually, as I look into the reporting section. So if you want to reply, it'd be really great to see what services have you seen increase the most during COVID-19. So looking at your report section, that'd be really great if you could have a look through here. Whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to quickly go through and head into the report section of my dashboard. And there's actually getting loads of questions, particularly around usage at the minute. So user usage, they want to see who's using Classroom on a daily basis, for example. And the report section, there's a lot here, and it can sometimes be a little difficult to navigate. So I'm just going to give you a few top tips, which can really be useful for you. So just around the app usage, you'll know that we can see like an overview of how your tools are being used across your domain, which is really good. Some people are finding a bit more about like Classroom data, and they'll typically go here to Classroom. This just gives you some kind of overall aggregate data of like the number of active classes, classes created, posts created, etc. And at any of these pages, you have this option to select the reports, and you can choose these different options. That's all you get from Classroom right now. But if you want to delve a bit deeper and find out some more information, either by an organization unit perhaps, or an individual user, what I'd recommend is going down to this user section, and we have the apps usage activity over here. So hopefully we can see that okay. So the apps usage activity. And this is nice because it allows you to go through and you can either filter by just an organization unit or an individual user. And you have all these different options that you can show. So I'd recommend just having a look and seeing if I want to find out, for example, Classroom, I want to see an individual user on a given date, when they last used Classroom, the classes they created, and the posts they've created on a given day. So for example, if I want to go and just find some information about an individual user, such as myself, I can go through and do that, and that's going to give me all the information just about that user that I want to go ahead and select, such as when they last used Classroom on a given day. So some really useful features, and again, you can split that by organization unit level, which is really good if you work in like a multiple school Google tenancy. So that's the kind of app usage that we have on here as well. Just before I delve into some of the auditing tools, I'm going to have a quick look and show what's been kind of most popular for you. So we can see that most people are kind of seeing Meet use increase, which is actually what we're seeing. So Meet and Classroom have been our two biggest kind of increases across our G Suite Education worldwide. So it's good to know, and that's kind of what we'd expect on here. So back on the report section, it's also worth noting that you have all of this option here. So you have all these extra audit functionality. So as an admin, you have all these great features. So if I want to do an audit just on my administrators, for example, I can go through and see every change that any administrator in my domain has made for the last 6 months. And I can drill that down and filter by individual admin. I can filter by event type. I've got lots of different options in here as well. So this is really great if you want to just go and see like who's done what. So I can see I've got all these different kind of options of who's gone through and changed some certain things. I've got all these great features. So what I love and use fairly frequently is this drive audit. And it shows you all of the drive activity across your domain and who made those changes and what happened. So you can see if someone has gone through and see if someone's used an item. You might want to, for example, see if there's been any like files that have been downloaded. This will go through and show all the files that have been downloaded in the last 6 months in your domain. So really, really useful tool that you can go through and have a look. You can go through at any point, you can go through and create reporting rules for these. So I've actually created a rule that's going to go through and send me an alert every time somebody has downloaded a file on my domain, which is really great. And you've got all these different options you can go through and have a look at. So if you want to go and see how users are logging in, whether there's been any kind of successful attacks, or if there's been a particular tool here, you've got all these different filters. A government-backed attack, as deep as that if you want, login challenges, login verifications. You might want to set up an alert for suspicious logins. I think I've got a few different kind of options here. So I've got a few suspicious logins over the last 6 months. And if I want to, again, I can go through and just create a rule here. And I can call this like suspicious alert. And I can choose to send an email to all of my administrators, or it might just be one individual such as myself. So I'm going to go through now. And as soon as I create that, every time that Google detects a suspicious login on my account, I'll get an email notification, which is really, really useful. So that's the reporting section, really powerful tool. And as I mentioned before, that leads into what's called the Alert Center, which is where we bring in all of our kind of reporting rules. There's a number of default ones on here as well, but you can manage and see all of your basically alerts in one place. So if you've chosen to configure email alerts, great, they'll be in your inbox, but the Alert Center is also just one great place where you can go through and see all of your different kind of options. So for example, I've got like activity rules that I've configured for drive downloads, and I can go through and have a look at any of these here. You'll see that I had a couple created today. So this was the data loss prevention rule. This was this document called bank details I selected earlier. And I can go through and see exactly all the information about that criteria. So obviously I knew about it because I created it, but this will give me insight into all my users across my domain. And I can go through and actually, if I had access to the document, I could view it. But I've got all these different options. So a really, really great tool called the Alert Center. And that's pretty much it on there. So what we would recommend is there's a security checklist where we just basically suggest best practices. And if you haven't already, now might be a great time whilst we've got a bit of time on your hands to go through and do a security kind of health check on your domain based on this checklist here. Before I go into another quick quiz, Simon, have we got any kind of questions that have come up on the chat?
We've answered quite a few of them, actually. I might just throw one out there. I might just voice this one. Can you specify a custom DLP rule matching on a list of keywords?
Absolutely, yeah. So in the DLP, you've got loads of kind of pre-made templates, but you can provide either a list of keywords or regular expressions. So a really great question, whoever answered that.
And there's an additional to that. Is there a limit on how many keywords can be specified?
Good question. Not that I know of. We'll have a look. We'll get back to you. Maybe during a later section, I'll follow up on that question. Really good question.
Thanks, Ollie.
Cool. Okay. In which case then we will just have a quick summary quiz. This one's only 2 questions. So again, if you're still with us, joinpd.com, and the code is on the bottom of the banner here. And we're going to start off with this first question was, which service would you use to delete old mail out of users' inboxes? You should have 3 options on your screen. Who's been listening? Cool. And I think everyone's done pretty well there. Unfortunately, a couple of people maybe see me after the lesson chose DLP. It's not the correct answer. DLP is a really great way of preventing accidental or intentional sharing, which might contain sensitive information. But Vault is a really clever tool to basically go through and remove mail, either based on a rule that you specified or based on how long it's been in the user's inbox for. Well done, those ones here. And second question is, which of these is not a two-step verification option? So we've got 4 options here. So Google Authenticator app, security key, fingerprint, or SMS message. Oh, bit divisive. Everyone's kind of going for the right answer now, which is, of course, fingerprint, which is a bit of a strange one, actually. I guess if you're syncing it up with your phone, you might have a fingerprint on your phone to unlock it. But yes, we don't currently have fingerprint options yet directly and natively out of it there. Good stuff. Well done, everybody. So just to wrap this section here, the privacy and security, will make these slides available for you later, but here's just some key kind of steps that we'd recommend just kind of reviewing with. The privacy and the trust links down the bottom there are really useful to share with people who might be concerned about some of the G Suite security rules. So please do become familiar with those and just keep them in your pocket or on a bookmark in case you need to refer to them later there. Cool. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you, Ollie. Yeah, and this leads me to one of my favorite slides. But wait, there is more. Most people don't read that up, but I really enjoy that. So, in all seriousness, this is leading us into G Suite Enterprise for Education. So what we've been hearing from customers is, this is wonderful, and the security functionality is great, and the ability to kind of administer these controls is fantastic. But we are large institutions, and we need some more advanced functionality that we've seen elsewhere. That's really where we've come in with G Suite Enterprise for Education, which is really, it's really offering enterprise-grade capabilities. So in a nutshell, the way to think about it is advanced admin controls, enhanced analytics and search, enterprise-grade communication and collaborative tools. So it's really just adding on to what's already included in G Suite for Education, but just taking it that next step. And Ollie's going to dive in and really take you deep into G Suite Enterprise for Education, which, as you'll see, has a lot more to it.
Great stuff. Thanks, Simon. So as we discussed before, we've got our kind of 3 buckets, and we've just outlined a few key additional features of Enterprise for Education, which you may decide are really useful for your domain. So and we're going to go through and have a look at some of these in a bit more detail. So around protecting data, we've got context-aware access and the ability to store your data in certain data regions. We've got the investigation tool, security sandbox in the protecting users, and some really nice things around like our security dashboard and our Gmail logs and admin reports in BigQuery. So we're going to have a look at some of these features now. So starting off with protecting data, the first thing I want to have a look at is this really great tool called context-aware access, and it allows you to basically limit or restrict users' access based on the context of how they're logging in. So it could be whether they are on a particular device, or whether they're within an IP address range, or even geographical location. So all of this can be done in the admin console. So in the security section, once you have G Suite Enterprise for Education enabled, you've got a number of additional tools available for you here. So the one that I'm going to start with is context-aware access down here. And it's a really great tool. So you basically start off by specifying an access level. So I've got a few already created here. So for example, company-owned devices. So this could be Chromebooks that I manage in a school, or it could be Windows devices that I've approved in the admin console. And you may choose to only allow users to access Google Drive on one of those devices. These access levels are really easy to go ahead and create. I'm just going to give this a quick example just to show you. And then you can specify on any of these kind of 3 attributes. So a subnet of IP ranges, device policies, or geographic origin. Or you could actually do the opposite and say if it doesn't meet these conditions. So I'll quickly show how this works. I've got a few here. So let's imagine I was working in a Swedish school, just for benefit here. and I only wanted to give my users access to Gmail, for example, when they were in Sweden. Or in UK school, my users only to access any of my first-party G Suite services within the UK. I can then go through and assign these access levels, and you can apply this to individual users, you can apply it to groups or organizational units here. So if I wanted to apply this to all of my users, I could actually go through and say that Gmail can only be accessed within the UK, for example. Now, to show this working, I'm actually going to choose Sweden only access. So in a moment, I can try and access my Gmail and show you that I won't have access as a result of this tool. So it can take up to 24 hours to apply. I'm going to quickly just go through and see if I can access my Gmail. That is still working, but I'll come back to that in just a few moments. Hopefully it's 24 seconds, not 24 hours, but super simple to go through and configure here. So think about, perhaps you might want users to access Google Drive, but only on a device which you've approved. So perhaps you allow students to bring in their own Windows devices, but you want to approve those in the admin console before you allow them to access Google Drive on it. So a number of really useful tools that you can go through on context-aware access there. Let me just see if this has worked yet. There we are, perfect, 24 seconds. And so as soon as I try to access Gmail outside of Sweden, in this case, you can see I don't have access. So we've actually seen a number of, I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on, just because I might need my Gmail later. But we've seen a number of great use cases for this. So maybe you don't want your staff to access their Gmail when they're not at school, and you could only allow them to access Gmail within the IP range of your school, for example. So some clever things that you can go ahead and do with that. So that's context-aware access. Beyond that, we've also got another feature called data regions, which actually we don't see as much of a big use case in particularly in the UK. It's typically, there's no need to keep your data within the European Union as part of GDPR regulation, but we know that in certain countries, for example, there are political or cultural needs to do so. So we do offer you the ability to allow some users to keep their data within the European Union or North America, should you wish. So that's our two options there. And then moving on to some additional ways you can go ahead and protect some users. The first thing we're going to look at is this really great feature called the investigation tool, which, as we showed before, it really goes through and it lets you kind of triage any things that might have slipped through the net, for example, and you can immediately take action. So we looked at Google Vault. Great example if there's kind of some historical mail you need to remove from users' inboxes. But let's imagine there's a mail that's just landed 2 minutes ago in all of your users' inboxes, and you want to really quickly go ahead and remove that before many people open it. You can go ahead and do that really quickly with the investigation tool. So I'm going to go through and just show a few ways to do that. Actually, before I get to the investigation tool, I want to show another feature, which is called the dashboard, which you get access to once you have G Suite Enterprise for Education. And it's actually a really great way to go through and use your investigation tool. So here we have these dashboard and the investigation tool. I'm actually going to show the investigation tool, but via my security dashboard here. So your security dashboard gives you an overview of kind of key metrics, security metrics across your domain. Again, this is similar to all other reports up to 180 days, but we'll talk about how we can use BigQuery to actually go through and export some of these reports, and you can have a historical kind of flow going longer. But it's really nice. It just gives you an overview for maybe this week of what's been happening across my domain, how many files have been shared externally. Really crucially for me, I'm actually going to have a look at the spam filters here. So I can see there's been a couple of like phishing attacks in here. No suspicious attachments, which looks good. I've got a couple of spoofing things I might want to go through and investigate. And what's really great about this is I can go through and have a look at the OAuth grants. I can see a few people giving access to Cloud Ready. I'm kind of okay with that. Paired X being used, again, I'm quite happy with that, but I might want to go in and have a look in some of those. But I'm going to start off just by having a look at this phishing report here. And again, I've only got this filtered for the last 7 days, but I could extend this up to 180 days. I can see I've got a couple of days where I've got a few phishing attacks have come through. So I'm going to go through and investigate this date, the 26th of April. And I can just go through, switch back to the 26th of April. And then this will show me a couple of kind of emails that have come in, and I can see I've got this one email that's been flagged as phishing, called PayPal refund awaiting. And this is really great. I can go through and find some information about it. I can see who the recipient was in this case. I can see who the sender was. So it's Mickey Mouse. I know he's probably up to no good. And if I want to, I can actually go through and with one click, I can actually take this information and go to the investigation tool. And I can take all that information from that report and it goes into my investigation tool parameters here. So I've gone through and it's created a search. You can obviously go through and create these yourself. But what I really like is because I've come from the dashboard, it's pulled in all the information such as the date, spam classification, what the subject was, and I can go through and it gives me some further detail about these messages here. So luckily this has only gone to one individual user, but I get some really nice insight into this email and I can see that actually it came from paypal@gdemo.uk. So that's a bit of a flag for me, a red flag already. And what's great about this is if I want as an admin, I can go through and have a look at this email. It shows me all the message headers, which is really great. And then with one click, I can actually go through and see the message. So without having to go to Google Vault, I could justify why I'm looking at this. So let's call this a phishing investigation. And I can actually go through and see the content of this message. So I can go through and have a look, display some external resources if I want to. And I can see that this actually went through. So this I can see is just out to a standard kind of bit.ly link. So this doesn't look particularly great. So I've got a few different options here. Let's imagine if I want to go through and delete this message, I've got a really easy way of doing that. So I could either do it one at a time, or if I had this going to hundreds of users, I could just go through and select all of them. And I could go through and choose to delete that message from the inbox of the user just by typing in delete one message. Helps if you spell it correct. There we are. Cool. And then so that's just obviously one user, but if this was hundreds, it's a really easy way just to go through and remove that message from the user's inboxes within just a few seconds, which is a really, really powerful tool. So that's the investigation tool in a nutshell. But what I really like about this is I can then go through and maybe if I'm a bit concerned about Mickey, maybe he's been up to a bit of silliness, I can go through and carry out some deeper investigations here. So I can actually choose to click on Mickey and I can maybe pivot and I could create a new investigation search here to find out why this might have come through. So maybe I'm suspecting Mickey of performing some silly drive events perhaps. So I could actually go through and I can go and see all of the drive log events where Mickey was the actor. So everything that Mickey's been up to. And I can go through and press search and this will show me all of the events that have been logged where Mickey undertook that action in Google Drive. So I'm going to get quite a few here. So I can see there's loads of stuff in there. So maybe I want to drill down a little bit further. So I might want to add a condition. And maybe I want to have a look and see if there's been like a visibility change perhaps. So maybe I want to say, maybe just go to visibility change here. And I want to see if any of the files that Mickey's been using have been shared externally. And I can then go through and search that. And that might restrict and filter down my investigation here. So really powerful tool. A lot of this can be done with Drive API, but it's nice to have it all in one place. And I can see actually, yeah, I've got like this file here, the PayPal info, and I can see that this was shared externally, which is a bit strange. So what I can do is I can actually go through and investigate this individual file a bit further. So I can go and audit the file permissions of this. And you'll see I've got all these options and I can actually see that this was shared with paypal@gmail.com with full editing access. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all go and have a chat with Mickey Mouse, but then I've also got this option here where I can go through and I can remove access for that user here. So without the authentication of the end user, I can go through and make that as a super admin here. So that's removed those access from there, which is a really, really great tool that you can do. You've got a number of other options such as disabling download, printing, copy. You can change owners of individual files on here, which is a really great tool. It's just a fantastically really powerful tool that you can go ahead and use. And that's called the investigation tool and links really nicely from the security dashboard. Cool. So let's move on. Have a look at our next section. Unless there's any questions, Simon. I've seen your face pop up on the side there. We're all good.
We're all good at the moment. We have some questions related to Chromebook management, cool, which we can jump into later on.
We'll come back to that. No problem at all. And just on Security Sandbox, it's another really nice feature that I like about G Suite Enterprise for Education. And it's in your Gmail section here. And if you go into Gmail in the advanced section, What the security sandbox does is it allows you to basically execute any attachment if you want in a virtual environment. And so if there's any kind of malicious behavior, you can then specify what to do with it. And so this actually all happens before it ends up hitting the user's inbox, which is really powerful. So you can go ahead and configure this in the advanced settings of Gmail. And you can apply this just for individual users. This will only work for those users who you have an enterprise license for. But very simple to configure. It's simply a tick box activity within the admin console called Security Sandbox. And you can just go through and apply this at the top level, or you could apply it to everyone. And if you want, you can actually customize this with Security Sandbox rules, for example, and you can configure this to only match on perhaps like certain metadata or anything that you want to on here as well. So you've got all these different options. It's just a really nice feature. If you do work in a school that receives lots of external kind of attachments, you have this option, which might be really useful to go ahead and configure. Cool, and then so that brings us into the providing insights section. So the last kind of bucket of our Giuseppe features. So the first thing I want to have a quick look is the security health. So we talked before about this security checklist that you might have, and you can actually go through and manually check all these features here. But what's really great about the security health checklist is actually gives really like suggested best practices of things that you might want to go through and remediate in your domain. So when you go to the security section, when you have G Suite Enterprise license, you can click on security health. And this will load through some of our kind of suggested best practice settings that you might want to go ahead and explore. And so beyond just giving you suggested ideas, it actually goes through and tells you any kind of individual organization units or users where this setting may not be correctly applied. And then with one click, you can go directly to the relevant point within the admin console to make that change. So a really great tool to go through and just see kind of what's happening across your domain. You can use it. Probably not going to use it every day, but it's a really nice feature to go through when it finally loads and have a look at all of these security risks that you might have, and then go and reactively make adjustments to those. I might leave that just loading for a second. You can then obviously, as I said, have a look at the different kind of policies available for you there. And then Security Center dashboard was something that I kind of showed you already. So this is where you can get some insight and visibility and metrics. And then what's really great about that is you can then, with one click, as I showed, go and have a look at that investigation tool. Still loading. Cool. And then this is a really fantastic tool, and it's probably never been more useful than right now when you want to get some kind of reporting and usage activity of your users who are using your tools at an incredible level. We're seeing users wanting to do clever things such as track attendance by who's accessed to Google Meet or who's watching Meet live stream. See who's been logging into Classroom once a day. And so you can access a lot of these reports through our reports API. But what's fantastic is if you have G Suite Enterprise for Education, you can basically toggle a feature that goes through and logs all of your basically reporting functionality, so all of your usage and activity reports into BigQuery, and you can go and then make queries, analyze it in sheets, do all that other good stuff. So I'm going to quickly show you how that works. So in my report section, once you have G Suite Enterprise for Education configured, you have a new toggle down at the bottom called BigQuery Export. And it's pretty easy. You just have to turn it on and choose a BigQuery project ID. And then once a day, sometimes more often, it's going to take all of your usage and activity reports and go through and put them into BigQuery. So for those of you who are familiar with BigQuery, this will make sense. For those of you who aren't, apologies. This might look a little bit geeky and high level, but it's a really clever tool. So I'll talk about Gmail logging as well in a moment, but you can basically log all of your Gmail messages into BigQuery and run your own reports here. But in the report section, I've got two options. I've got the activity and the usage, and I can go through and see what appears in all of my kind of activity reports here. So I can see all this functionality on any given date that I want for user email, voice access, docs access. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of different kind of metrics and parameters you can go ahead and query here. So to give you some examples, I've got a few kind of saved queries here. So maybe I want to get a Meet report So if you're familiar with kind of like just standard SQL, this is an example here. And this will go through, and if I run this, it's going to give me all of my event names, event types, the emails for the last 1,000 users for Google Meet. So I can get all that in one place. So really clever tool. You might be managing your data sets elsewhere. Some of you might be using Google Data Studio, but you've got all this information automatically going into BigQuery on a daily basis. So that's going to keep all of your kind of business intelligence dashboards and whatever you're using nicely up to date. So really, really clever tool that you can go through and use. And you'll see some of these will have maybe a 3-day limit. Some of them will be almost instantaneously. So this one here is obviously a bit of a delay on there, but a really, really great, powerful tool. Lots of different clever things you can do here. So yeah, I've got, for example, like classroom interaction query. I can go through and see all my users when they last interacted with Classroom. So a really great tool. And just whilst I'm on that as well, you may or may not know that you can now, once you have BigQuery set up, you can add BigQuery connectors into Google Sheets. So if you have a Google Sheet, you can analyze billions of rows of data within a Google Sheet, which is really, really powerful. So you can see I brought in some Classroom functionality on here as well. I'm doing that same kind of Meet tool. So if I want to take like a log of all of my Meet usage, I can just go through and refresh this, or I can go through and edit this query here. It's the same one I just did here. I can go through and refresh that, and that will then just go through and update my Google Sheet with all of my Google Meet usage within a click of a button, which is really, really clever. And if I want to have like a classroom log on a given date, I could then go through and just provide, let's say, the 24th of April. And that's going to show me all of my users who access Google Classroom on the 24th of April within one click. So really powerful insights that you get through BigQuery. And then you can interact that with Google Sheets or any other features that you're using. Security health did take a while. I'll come back to that, I promise. So that's the usage data. And then likewise, you've got all of your Gmail logs as well. So every message, all the logs that you get through your email log search, you can push all of that into BigQuery. So in a few years' time, you can have essentially a log of all of your Gmail interaction. And then you can go through and query that as much as you need to see how your users are interacting with mail. And then finally, just another nice feature is access transparency. So this is really great if you have like a reseller or Google. This just gives you a nice kind of audit log of every time someone's gone in to kind of have a look at your data. So really useful for like referencing support tickets, etc. So you can see all that in one place. And I think that's it from me. And I'm going to pass over to Simon, who's going to talk about some additional G Suite Enterprise for Education features. And then I'll come back in and show a few others, particularly around the Windows 10 management. Before we delve into that, Simon, is there any kind of outstanding questions that we might want to address?
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. There have been lots of really good questions, actually, but one that I think might be worth addressing is this one that's just come up on the screen here.
So can reports app usage activity be delegated to individuals rather than just super admins? Unfortunately, we don't have the ability through the user interface to allow reporting just on an OU level. But we have a number of schools who get around this by kind of exporting this data onto spreadsheets, for example, and then providing that data to individual users based on an organization unit, for example, or creating custom Data Studio dashboards, pulling off that data. And likewise, if you've got G Suite Enterprise for Education, then that's all going into BigQuery anyway. And then you could very easily create your own dashboard in something like Data Studio to pull that data in. But unfortunately, no, we don't have through the native UI of the admin console the ability to delegate that access. Great question there.
Thanks, Ollie. Maybe you can jump into some of those other questions while I carry on and take a look at the additionals.
Perfect.
Okay. So diving straight into these additional features, it's worth bringing up Meet again. Many of you are familiar with the advanced functionality of Meet, but that sits within G Suite Enterprise for Education. But just to call it out, some of the notable features, the ability to record meets, save to drive, obviously very useful for teaching purposes. International phone dialing is something we've seen a lot of institutions interested in. So basically getting around the need to use a US number. So having that option to be able to dial in from your local numbers to meetings, if that's something that's needed within your institution. Running larger meetings with up to 250 participants as well, which obviously has been very useful. So these features have been made available to all G Suite users up until September 30. just to enable education institutions to keep being productive, to keep being able to teach and help the students continue to learn. We've talked through some of those new features as well that have been added: the tiled screen, the Chrome tab, low light, and noise cancellation as well. And moving on, something I didn't talk to was the live streaming function up to 100K participants within the domain, which one of the use cases for that is large lectures, for example. It's worth kind of chatting to the security side of things, I think, considering this summit as well. So Meet adheres to the same privacy commitments and data protections as the rest of Google's enterprise services. We don't use customer data for advertising or sell customer data to third parties. We're always undergoing regular, rigorous security and privacy audits for our services, including Meet. We don't have user attention tracking features or software. All data in Meet is encrypted in transit by default as well. The Meet recordings are stored in Drive and encrypted at rest. And additionally, I think it's worth calling out the counter abuse measures. I'm sure you've all seen the headlines and the fear around using communication tools like Meet, but just rest assured, we have anti-hijacking measures for both web meetings and dial-ins as well. So one way to talk to this, I suppose, is by explaining that our meeting codes are 10 characters long with 25 characters in the set. Effectively, this makes it really hard to brute force or guess meeting codes and jump in that way. External participants can join directly only if they're on the calendar invite or if they've been invited by in-domain participants from within the Meet session. So any other external participants must request to join the meeting. I'm sure you've experienced this as well. So that's Meet. Originality reports. Many of you may be familiar with it. Some of you may have never heard of it. It's a fantastic and helpful citation tool. This is something that a lot of institutions have really been coming to have conversations about. So just to explain the way we approach this citation or plagiarism tool, if you will, at Google, we like to take a positive approach to learning rather than punitive. This tool is really helping both teachers and learners have access to powerful search functionality to check against citations and avoid plagiarism instances. So using the power of search, Originator Reports compares students' work against hundreds of billions of web pages and tens of millions of books. The reports highlight anything from missing citations, ineffective paraphrasing, for example, or unintended plagiarism due to the high similarity and links to the external sources. And within G Suite Enterprise for Education, there's unlimited usage of this tool. Again, really important to call out that data is not kept and stored for commercial purposes or otherwise. So something that I love to add to this is that in beta, we have something called school matches. So in the future, we'll be adding an option for schools to have a private repository of student submissions that they own. So instructors can really get across the peer-to-peer matching within their institution. And, once again, I think it's worth noting that a lot of colleges and universities are really interested in this tool alone. So when you're considering G Suite Enterprise for Education, maybe it is that you're looking at something like Originality Reports, or maybe it is that you're looking at, the investigation tool, or perhaps it's the ability to access BigQuery. But it's really important to not just assess them as standalone tools, is to really kind of assess the value of these tools from a collaborative perspective, right? They're all coming together in a bundle, which is pretty great. Speaking of great, cloud search is something we probably don't talk about enough. The way to explain this tool really simply is to think of it as a little Google search within your domain, your own little personal Google search within your domain. So it's a fantastic tool, and we have a lot of institutions that come to us and say, hey, I just want to get across my loads of information. We see this, right, with organizations becoming increasingly more complex with data and workloads, moving it all to the cloud. And as a result, we need a way to access this information intuitively. Cloud search uses machine learning as well to be very intuitive in terms of how you can find that information. So, for example, on the next slide, we talk about how you can search for your information by just typing in things like, documents mentioning me. A little bit egotistical, or maybe your favorite, Simon's favorite marketing documents, for example. And then another benefit of this tool is the assist cards. So perhaps you have meetings coming up. It might be your regular weekly meeting with Ollie, which will be maybe it'll be a document with 5 million questions for Ollie, for example. And that might just intuitively present and say, hey, do you want to add this document to the meeting? And then really importantly, the fact that it syncs with third-party data sources as well. So it's not just searching anything within Google. It's anything searchable within your domain to make it a seamless tool.
Cool.
Windows 10 management.
Do you want me to talk to this a little bit, Simon?
Yeah, that would be great. Or if you could jump in. Thanks.
Cool. So a new feature that's been in beta for a little while. Actually, some of you may have even played around with this, but it just got announced publicly earlier this week, actually. But for G Suite Enterprise for Education, you've got some really nice Windows 10 management functionality. So using GCPW, you can really easily allow users to sign into your Windows 10 devices with their current Google accounts. So really great if you're kind of a really heavy kind of Chrome usage, really heavy G Suite users, but maybe there's a certain needs where you might have some Windows devices kicking around. You've got all these different ways to just basically configure your devices so they can just very simply sign in with their Google account, which is really great if you're going to use something like Drive File Stream on those accounts because you're kind of already authenticated in. But then beyond that, you've got a few management functionality within the admin console to manage these Windows 10 devices, such as managing administrative permissions, configuring updates, BitLocker, and some custom settings. I'll tell you what, I'll quickly go through and have a look at some of these features for you now. So once you've got this, you can then obviously go through and enroll your Windows 10 devices, and you don't need to use Windows 10 Join or anything, or Azure. You can connect them directly to your admin console. And then once you've got that, you've got these Windows settings available for you down in the bottom left-hand corner. And then it's actually fairly simple to go through and configure policies. It's not quite the same UI that you would use for making kind of Chrome device settings or user settings. You just have to use the OMA URIs, which are obviously publicly available, and you can go through and configure those. But you've got your desktop security settings, Windows Update settings, BitLocker settings, and then all these custom settings here. And you can apply these for in the same way you would basically everything else in the admin console, either at the top level for all of your devices, or you can configure different settings, perhaps for devices which will be used by staff or individual students. And you can just add custom settings based on the OMA URI. I've got one here which I've applied to everybody. Very simple to configure. I just basically copied in the OMA URI here, chose the value, and that will then disable the camera on all of my Windows 10 devices on my domain. So really simple to go through and configure. We're seeing lots of interest around this here. We just released a new blog post earlier this week, and there's some really great support articles. So feel free just to go and have a look at that. The support articles do a great job of explaining what you can do with it. And so as soon as you're kind of ready to start an enterprise trial, this will be made available to you instantly now. There's no need to wait for beta for it, which is great. And you can just have a play around with configuring your Windows 10 devices in the same admin console you use to manage your Chromebooks. Just to let you know, the Mac OS is on the roadmap, but not for a little while longer just yet, but the team are working on it. Cool, so Simon, back to you.
Thanks, Ollie. That was comprehensive, and I hope everyone got a lot out of that, really getting across the security functionality, but beyond the security functionality, what else G Suite Enterprise for Education can do for your institution. I think it's important to call this out. What does it mean for G Suite for Education? We want to reassure all of our users and our customers that G Suite for Education has always been and will always remain free to schools. We'll continue to add new features to G Suite for Education at no additional cost. And And in the same vein, we'll continue to add features to G Suite Enterprise for Education as well. So, but I think it's important to explain that we remain committed to G Suite for Education. So moving along, if you're thinking about, there was a question before on the cost of G Suite Enterprise for Education. I'll just talk through the current pricing and licensing for this product. So there's probably the first thing I should point out is that when you're purchasing G Suite Enterprise for Education, it's on an annual plan that you're committing to. So 1 year, you can prepay for that year, or you can be billed monthly. And there's two different ways of actually purchasing G Suite Enterprise for Education, as you can see on this slide. So partial domain licenses and full domain licenses. Now, one thing to consider is that within partial domain licenses, there is limited functionality within some of the tools, and we can share information on this later on as well. But the way it works on the partial domain license is £42 per year for staff members, and the same for students. When you're purchasing on this basis, there's a minimum threshold of 15% of your total staff number. So that's any individual that's full-time or part-time staff or faculty within your institution, or the number 50, whichever is greater, whichever makes sense for you there. And then moving on to full domain, this is something that a lot of institutions are interested in because they want to cover all of their users within their domain, including students. There is a current promotional deal here, which the introductory pricing, which ends on the 6th of June. I think that's extended slightly. I'll get an update on that in a minute, Ollie, if you can throw an update in. I think that's slightly off. It's the end of July, right?
I think end of July, yeah.
Thank you. End of July 2020. So the way this works is it's obviously a price reduction there, 50%, as you can see, £21 a year for staff. And then it's free for all students when you're looking at licensing all your staff on a ratio of 1 to 10. So one way to explain this is, imagine you had 100 staff, that was the full number, then you would have 1,000 free licenses for your student. If you had 2,000 students, then you simply need to just purchase more licenses to make sure that those students are covered. So it would be, simple mathematics. You would need 200 licenses in that instance. So just to demonstrate the way that works there. So moving along, requesting a free trial, please do request a free trial. If you really want to experience the features, yes, I think it's great to have Ollie take us through, and some of you, I'm sure, have followed along in the back end as well. If you already have a trial or you already have partial domain licenses, for example. But if you really want to get across it, the best way is to get your hands on a free trial, which gives you access to 10 licenses for a period of 30 days. And we can help you pilot that and walk you through that and providing that support. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any more queries you want to discuss. But of course, we have our wonderful resellers listed on the next slide here within the UK. And you can reach out to any of these resellers and they'll be able to support you with a free trial as well. And that really concludes our webinar. Maybe it might be an idea. We've got a little bit of time, Ollie, if you'd like to just jump in and answer a few of these questions.
Yeah, sure. You want to flag any available? I don't know, you or Sky on the back end. I've been trying to follow along the Q&A document whilst we've been talking here. So I put a few answers in there. I'm not sure we've got any outstanding ones. Let's have a look. Is it possible to stop login to school managed Chromebooks using non-school email addresses or guest based on IP address as part of standard Google Apps for Education? Something that we're working on. So obviously we have loads of functionality within the admin console to configure who can access a Chromebook anytime. You can obviously restrict it so they have to use a school email address. We don't have the functionality yet to allow guest access based on IP address, but we are actively working on different possibilities and Chrome access management in a similar way to we do with kind of context-aware access. So watch this space on that one. I think someone also asked a question around only allowing access to Chromebooks using a school email address during certain times, but then also the ability to set holidays. Yeah, that's actually a really great feature request. So hopefully you're aware, but we have in the Chrome device settings, this functionality called off hours, which allows you really great in like a bring your own device environment, or maybe an environment where a student might take their device home and you might want them at home to have access to sign in with a personal Gmail account, or maybe share it with a sibling, for example. So that's really great, and then it becomes fully managed and applies all of your device policies between the hours of 8 and 5, for example. I've actually put that forward as a feature request. I'll try and dig out the public bugonizer and share that with whoever answered that question, and so you can add to there as well, to basically have a calendar, so it only applies during during school holidays, for example. Currently, a workaround is to basically configure different OUs at the minute, and then you could move all of your Chromebooks into a different OU and then move them back in. We have some very clever people doing things with GAM, for example, to bulk move a load of Chromebooks into a different OU, which has almost exact same settings, but you just configure one or two differently. Maybe on May the 25th, and then on May the 31st, you move them all back into a different organization unit. So great feature request. We've heard it before, and we'll see what we can do. But for now, there's workarounds with the APIs. A few other questions. Let's have a look. Google Chrome question. Is there any way when individuals log into Google services on Chrome and the browser auto logs in for the sync to be automatically turned on? This will help on non-persistent VDI machines. I'll look into that. I'm assuming you're talking about kind of Windows-based policies. I'll have a look to see in the group policies there as well. If whoever that was on this question here wants to just maybe chuck in a contact name or email address, I can try and follow up explicitly there as well. But it's worth noting that this Q&A document, after this session, when we finish, we'll make sure we respond to all those. So do feel free to bookmark this or keep it open, and we'll make sure we answer all those questions within the next hour or so.
That's great, Ollie. Thanks.
Any other questions I've missed?
I think, as you said, we can
follow up with these.
We can follow up with a lot of these questions. But yeah, if everybody could give us feedback, that would be wonderful. We'd like to know how we went, or what we can include next time as well, and how we can improve, and also maybe what was beneficial for you, and any other queries that you have as well. But you know, we've come well under time, which we were hoping for. We understand how busy everyone is in the current climate. So hopefully that really gave you a good view and a good understanding of security and how we approach it from the education perspective here at Google. We hope you enjoyed this webinar, and please, once again, do consider that trial. Reach out to me for soul@google.com. And yeah, we can take you from there. But thank you so much, everybody, and have a lovely day and a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.